The scripture reading today is the full story of Jesus' last days as it comes from the Gospel of Luke. This will take about 20 minutes, so if you want to just settle in, I ask you now to relax your body, to open your spirit, to be present in this place. And as we have just sung, hear this story that gives meaning and weight and purpose to our lives. The events of Palm Sunday, which we celebrated at the beginning of this service today, take place just a few days before Jesus' execution. And this is how Luke tells the story of Jesus' final days. In that final week, Jesus taught in the temple each day, and he spent each night outside the city on the Mount of Olives. Everyone got up early in the morning and came to the temple to listen to Jesus teach. The festival of unleavened bread, also called Passover, was near. The chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses were looking for a way to get rid of Jesus because they were afraid of what the people might do under his leadership. Then the adversary entered the heart of Judas of Kerioth, who was one of the 12 apostles. Judas went to talk with the chief priests and the captains of the temple police about how he could help them arrest Jesus. They were very pleased and offered to pay Judas some money. They came to an agreement, and Judas started looking for a good chance to betray Jesus when the crowds were not around. The day had come for the festival of unleavened bread, and it was time to sacrifice the Passover lambs. So Jesus said to Peter and John, "Go and prepare the Passover meal for us to eat." But they asked him, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" Jesus told them, "As you go into the city, you will meet a male servant carrying a jug of water. Follow him into the house that he serves and say to the owner, 'Our teacher wants to know where he can eat the Passover meal with his disciples.' The owner will take you upstairs to a large room that should be ready for you to use. Prepare the meal there." Peter and John left, and they found everything just as Jesus had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When the time came then for Jesus and the apostles to eat the Passover meal, he said to them, "I've really wanted to eat this Passover meal with you before my bitter struggle begins. I tell you, I will not have another Passover meal until the Passover is finally fulfilled in God's kingdom." Jesus took a cup of wine in his hands and he gave thanks to God. "Take this wine and share it with each other. I will not drink any more wine until God's kingdom comes." Jesus took some bread in his hands, and he gave thanks for it. He broke the bread and he gave it to all of his disciples. "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this to keep me with you always." And after the meal, he took another common cup and he shared it with them. He said, "This is my blood. It is shed for you, and with it, God makes a new covenant with you. The one who will betray me is here at the table with me. The Son of Man will die in the way that has been decided for him, but it will be awful for the betrayer." Then the apostles started arguing about who would ever do such a thing. The apostles got into an argument about which one of them was the greatest. So Jesus told them, "Kings near and far order their people around, and powerful people call themselves everyone's friend. But don't be like them. The most important one of you should be like the least important. Your leader should be like a servant." Who do people think is the greatest? A person who is served or the servant? It's the servant. It's the one who is served, right? But I've been with you as a servant. You've stayed with me in all my struggles. So I give you, disciples, the right to rule as kings over the 12 tribes of Israel. You will eat and drink with me in my kingdom, and you will each sit on a throne in order to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus then said, "Simon, Peter, listen to me. The role of the adversary is to test everyone, as a farmer does when he separates the wheat from the husks. But Simon, I've prayed that your faith may be strong. And when you've come back to me, help the others." Peter then said, "Lord, I am ready to go to jail with you and even die if I must." Peter, before a rooster crows in the morning, you will say 3 times that you don't even know me. Jesus asked his disciples then, "When I sent you out without a money bag or a traveling bag or sandals, was there anything that you needed and didn't have?" "No," they answered. Jesus told them, "But now, if you have a money bag, take it with you, and a traveling bag too. And if you don't have a knife, sell some of your clothes to get a knife. Do this because the scriptures say, he was considered a criminal. This was written about me, and it will soon come true." The disciples said, "Lord, here are 2 knives." "That's enough," Jesus said. Jesus then went out to the Mount of Olives, as he often did, and his disciples went with him. And when they got there, he told them, "Pray that you won't be put to the test." Jesus walked on a little way before he knelt down and prayed, "Father, if it is your will, please don't make me suffer by having me go through this. But do what you want, not what I want." Then an angel came from heaven to help him. Jesus was in great pain, and he prayed so sincerely that sweat fell from his face like blood. Jesus got up from praying, and he went back to the disciples who were asleep and worn out from being so sad. He said to them, "Why are you asleep? Wake up and pray that you won't be put to the test. While Jesus was still speaking, a large crowd then came up. It was led by Judas, one of the 12. He went over to Jesus and gave him the kiss of greeting. Jesus asked Judas, "Are you betraying the Son of Man with the kiss of greeting?" When Jesus' disciples realized what was about to happen, they asked, "Lord, should we attack them with our knives?" One of the disciples even struck at the slave of the high priest with his knife and cut off the servant's right ear. "That's enough," Jesus said. And he touched the servant's ear and healed it. Jesus spoke to the chief priests and the temple's police and the leaders who had come out to arrest him, and he said, "Why do you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me like a criminal? I was with you every day in the temple, and you didn't arrest me then. But this is your time, and darkness is in control." Jesus was then arrested and led out to the house of the high priest, while Peter followed at a distance. Some people built a fire in the midst of the courtyard and warmed themselves around it. And Peter then sat there with them. And a servant girl saw Peter. Then, after she had looked at him carefully, she said, This man was with Jesus." Peter said, "Woman, I don't even know that man." A little later, someone else saw Peter and said, "Surely you're one of them." "No, I'm not," said Peter. About an hour later, another man insisted that man must have been with Jesus. He has a Galilean accent. They're from the same town. Peter replied, "I don't know what you're talking about." Right then, when Peter was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord then turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered that the Lord had said, "Before a rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will say 3 times that you don't even know me." Then Peter went out and wept bitterly. The men who were guarding Jesus made fun of him and beat him. They put a blindfold on him and said, "Now can you tell us who struck you?" They kept on insulting and bullying Jesus over and over again. At daybreak then, the nation's leaders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses, got together and brought Jesus before their council. They said, "Tell us, are you the Messiah?" Jesus replied, "Well, if I said so, you wouldn't believe me. And if I ask you a question, you're not going to answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of God all-powerful." And so they asked directly, "Are you the Son of God?" Jesus said, "Your words and actions imply that I am." They replied, "Why do we need more witnesses? He said it himself." Everyone in the council got up and led Jesus off to Pilate, the Roman governor for the region. They started accusing him and said, "We caught this man trying to get our people to revolt and stop paying taxes to the emperor. He also claims that He's the Messiah, our king. Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You're saying it," Jesus replied. Pilate told the chief priests and the crowd, "I don't find him guilty of anything." But they all kept on saying, "He has been teaching and causing disturbances all over Judea. He started down in Galilee, and now he's come all the way up here to Jerusalem." And when Pilate heard this, he said, "This man's from Galilee?" After Pilate learned that Jesus had come from a different region ruled by Herod, he sent him to Herod, who happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. For a long time, Herod had wanted to see Jesus and was very happy because he finally got a chance. He had heard a lot about Jesus and hoped that he would be able to see Jesus work a miracle. Herod asked him a lot of questions, but Jesus didn't answer. Then the chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses stood up again and accused him of all kinds of rebellious things. Herod and his soldiers made fun of Jesus and they insulted him. They put a fine robe on him and sent him back to Pilate. And that same day, Herod and Pilate became friends, even though previously they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and he told them, "Okay, you brought Jesus to me and said he was a troublemaker, but I've questioned him right here in front of you, and I do not find him guilty of anything that you've said he's done. Herod didn't find him guilty either, and he sent him back to me. This man doesn't deserve to be put to death. I'm just going to have him beaten with whips and set him free." But the whole crowd shouted, "No! Do away with this one! Give us Barabbas!" Now Barabbas was in jail because he had started a revolt in the city and had murdered someone. Pilate wanted to get away with setting Jesus free, so he spoke to the crowds again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Nail him to a cross!" Pilate spoke to him a third time. "But what crime has he done? I've not found him guilty of anything for which he should be executed. I'm going to have him beaten with a whip and set him free." But the people kept shouting as loud as they could that he has to be executed. Finally, Pilate gave in. He freed the man who was in jail for revolution and murder because he was the one that the crowd wanted them to set free. Then Pilate handed Jesus over for them to do with him as they wished. As Jesus was being led away, some soldiers grabbed hold of a man named Simon from Cyrene, and they made him carry the big crossbar, and he followed Jesus. A large crowd was following Jesus also, and in the crowd, a lot of women were crying and weeping for him. Jesus turned to those women and he said, "Women of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Cry for yourselves and for your children. Someday people will say, women who never had children are really fortunate. At that time, everyone will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us.' And they'll say to the hills, 'Hide us.' And if this can happen when the wood is green, what do you think will happen when it's dry? 2 criminals were also led out to be executed with Jesus. When the soldiers came to the place called Golgotha, the skull, they nailed Jesus to the crossbar and mounted him on the post. They did the same thing to the 2 criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive these people. They don't understand what they're doing. While the crowd stood there watching Jesus, the soldiers gambled for his clothes. The leaders insulted him by saying, he saved others. Now he should save himself if he's really God's chosen Messiah. The soldiers also made fun of Jesus and brought him some sour wine. And they said, if you're the King of the Jews, then save yourself. Above him was a sign that said, the King of the Jews. One of the criminals hanging there with him also insulted him, saying, aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and save us too. But the other criminal told the first one, don't you fear God? Aren't you getting the same punishment as this man? The 2 of us got what was coming to us, but he didn't do anything at all. And he said to Jesus, remember me when you come into your power. And Jesus replied, I promise that today you will be with me in paradise. Around noon, the sky turned dark and stayed that way until the middle of the afternoon. The sun stopped shining, and the curtain in the temple was torn in 2. Jesus shouted, Father, I entrust myself to you. And then he died. When the Roman officer saw what had happened, he praised God and said, Jesus must really have embodied justice. A crowd had gathered to see the terrible sight. After they had seen it, they were broken-hearted, and they went home. All of Jesus' close friends and the women who had come with him from Galilee stood off in the distance and watched. There was one man named Joseph who was from Arimathea in Judea. Joseph was a just and honest man, and he was eager for God's kingdom to come. He was also a member of the council, but he didn't agree with the decisions and actions that they had made and done. Joseph went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. He took the body down from the cross and wrapped it up in fine linen. And then he put it in a tomb that had been cut out of solid rock and never used. It was Friday. and the Sabbath was about to begin. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and watched how Jesus' body was placed into that tomb. Then they went to prepare the appropriate spices for his burial. But on the Sabbath day, they rested, as the law of Moses commands. Thanks be to God for these words of life. Amen.